Thanks for having me so much. I just love the energy in the room, and Melissa got us off to such a great start this morning. I was joking when the room was about half full, like I need to go make sure I'm empowered, and then I'm going to be ready to present this morning. So thanks so much for coming to this session. And I really hope today to offer you a different way to think about leadership, thus the title of the talk. So as a way of getting into this, I want to start with the idea of maturity. So who thinks that they understand what maturity is? Not a trick question. I'm not trying to call anybody out here. Maturity. Like if you had two people that you knew, would you be able to tell me which one of those people was more mature and which of those people was maybe less mature? Yes, we have a thumbs up back here. Yeah. So we intuitively know what this idea of maturity is all about. What I'm going to do today is give you a little bit of a framework around that and talk about how we should be thinking about leadership from a maturity perspective and make the case that this is really why we need to be thinking more about maturity, okay? So we're going to switch from maturity, one big idea that I want you to hold on to, and I want to set the stage for why maturity is important. So who has heard of this term VUCA? Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Some hands up around the room, right? So this is a term that comes out of the military. They actually adopted this term to describe warfare in the post-Cold War world. And the business world, we like to steal ideas from other disciplines. And the business world said, hey, this idea of VUCA is super important and super interesting for our organizations and our marketplaces as well. And so we use this term now to describe what it is like out there in our organizations and in our industries and in the world at large. So what is one really big, I want to invite you to think about this idea of VUCA, and I really want us to have a dialogue, so feel free to weigh in. What are some ways that we are seeing volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity in our world? Okay, yeah, right. It's so obvious. Why am I even asking? Okay, let's just popcorn it out. What are some of the things that are happening in the world that are contributing to this? Recession. Supply chain. Politics. What are we coming out of? Pandemic. Yeah, Great Recession. What else? Let's do a couple more. Racial tensions, war for talent, lack of, okay, you guys have it. This is like easy peasy. Right, so we are, and the research shows, increasingly living in a world that is defined by VUCA. So the level of complexity in particular continues to increase. The rate of change continues to increase. And what that is doing is creating a complexity crisis, okay? So this is some research from a lovely firm named Lectica, and they have studied what leaders at various levels can bring to their roles and what is expected from them in those roles. So what we have here on the left is a measure of capacity. The red line demonstrates what is the level of complexity that people in those roles could be expected to have to deal with, okay? So think of that as like that's the bar we're trying to meet. And what you see here along the bottom, supervisor, mid-level, upper level, senior, increasing levels of leadership, right? What do you notice about the red line and the green bars? They're not catching up. In fact, the gap is getting even bigger as you move from less senior levels to more senior levels, right? So this research has been replicated in the for-profit sector, the nonprofit sector, and the government sector, that we have a crisis of complexity, that our leaders in general are not able to meet the task demands, the level of complexity that is present in those sectors, okay? Not necessarily a good news story, which leads us to the leadership development imperative. This is why leadership development is so important, why we need to be focused on developing leaders, is because we have a crisis of complexity, because we are living in an increasingly VUCA environment. Getting leaders equipped to deal with that complexity and bring people along with them is more important than ever, okay? However, traditional leadership development does not quite do the job. So most of us, if you think about what are the foundational underpinnings of existing leadership development, it's the idea of skills and competencies, right? So many organizations may have a competency model that says, here are the things, here are the skills that we think are most important in our organization to move us forward. A lot of the training that we go to is around skills and competencies. Let me help you become better at strategic thinking. Let me teach you how to use Excel. I do a lot of that kind of skills training myself as a business owner. However, it is not sufficient to overcome that complexity crisis and lead people the way that we increasingly need to, okay? And so what I want to propose to you today is that this idea of vertical development is the antidote, or is an answer, a better answer than a pure traditional skills and competencies approach to leadership development. And the name of this framework is called vertical development, okay? And what vertical development enables us to do is to, I just so want to build on Melissa's talk. It enables us to step up and step out. It enables us to show up in a more empowered way, to lead differently, to lead more effectively. And so let's talk a little bit more about what vertical development is. Let's break it down into a couple of metaphors. So let's talk about horizontal development first. Horizontal development is the skill and competency approach to developing leaders that I just was talking about, right? So I can go to a class, and actually we're doing it right now, like I'm pouring more knowledge into your cup, right? Super important for us to have skills and have knowledge and to have competencies, but at a certain point in our leadership trajectory, as we get to more senior leadership levels, those skills, like, they're just less important because we already have most of what we need. We already have most of what we need. So you can think of horizontal development as necessary but insufficient. It is like pouring coffee into the cup. I'm adding more skills, I'm adding more tools, I'm adding more competencies to my existing container of who I am and how I show up. Does that make sense to everybody? Vertical development says we need a bigger cup. We need the venti version of ourselves. And so the analogy here is that we not only need to pour coffee into our cups, we need to learn things. I don't want to suggest that that's not important at all. But what I want to offer you today is the idea that actually growing our container, growing vertically in addition to horizontally, is also vitally important for us to be successful in our leadership roles, for us to help the other leaders in our organizations come along and be successful. Making sense? So all of us in here in the room have experienced horizontal development, and we have experienced vertical development. So when we think about vertical development, it is something that takes us out of our context, challenges our current way of looking at the world, and invites us to grow more mature, to grow more sophisticated in how we do that. So one of the best examples of something that promotes vertical development is living in another country, particularly one where they don't speak your primary language. Why is that? Can anyone tell me why that might be such a good vertical growth experience? Who's done that? Who's lived in another country where they talk to us a little bit about what that is like from a development perspective.
So I lived in the Middle East in a different country.
Uh-huh.
I thought I was so cool because I had taken 2 years of Arabic. In the first year, not even learning the language, just learning the alphabet. I wasn't even really know, let alone everything else to negotiate. I got the taxi cab, cup of coffee, everything to negotiate everything. And it was very interesting to not only employ the need of patience, to really sit there and be like, okay, I am getting through my very, very elementary Arabic language.
Uh-huh.
Negotiate with the taxi cab driver where I need to go, and then also understanding the cultural norms, making sure I wasn't wearing someone's shoulders or my legs and don't sit.
Yep.
Also, being present with whoever I'm speaking to, because I'll say it this way: if you're not present and you're not in the moment, then you're going to get run over, literally by a car. And being open to learning.
Yes.
I think the best piece of advice that I learned was a guy in Egypt, and the guy asked me, I was on the street corner, and we don't know how to cross the road. Literally, did not know how to cross the road. He turns to me, he's like, you want to learn how to walk like an Egyptian? to learn how to walk like this. Instead, close your eyes, pray to a law of God, and go. And I was like, okay, this is me being in a very good spirit. I had to grow my cup and be open to all.
Yes.
And open to myself.
Thank you. That was great. Okay, could not have asked. She's not a plant, I promise. Could not have asked for a better example of vertical development or vertical growth, right? So her perspective, I'm going to put some words in your mouth. Her perspective on the world and who she is in the world grew, I'm going to say exponentially during that time for you. So many of us have had vertical development experiences, all of us have, and all of us have also had horizontal experiences. So what are some examples? Let's go back to horizontal. What are some things that we engage in or things that may have happened to us that promoted horizontal development? When did you learn a new skill?
So I own a salon, hair salon, and throughout the pandemic, when we were closed, I also had a business project in the salon as well. So I was recruited by them that if I would be open to learn how to be a coach. So when we were at home pulling our hair out because the salon was closed,
Right.
I learned how to become a business coach.
Fabulous.
Salon as well. So I think that's
Good. What are some, yeah, I love that. What are some other horizontal? Yes.
I'm fairly new to this nonprofit in Charlotte, and within 30 days I was dropped on the data migration team. So wow, I learned a lot of lingo and everything.
Yeah. Learning about data migration.
So not just the software, but the whole rest of the gamut.
Yeah. Great. Awesome. One more. Let's hear one more. Yes.
I'm a financial executive, and one of the things that don't teach you in school is as you go up the ladder, this is my days in corporate before I became an entrepreneur, you get responsibilities for all these different functions. One of the functions happens to be HR, for human capital and everything that involves HR. But it's like, wait a minute, I came from accounting.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden,
you learn it.
You've been given this responsibility. Now you're responsible for people, responsible for running the department, correct? Responsible for, ensuring that the company is, going to be with the
Yeah. So I would actually make the argument that experience in particular is a good example of horizontal and vertical development, right? So there are a whole lot of things you had to learn about the HR discipline that you don't have to know when you're in finance. But what I'm also hearing you describe is this expansion of responsibility and this expansion of complexity in what you had to think about, what you had to navigate through, right? So we could make an argument that you grew more mature through that experience. Would that be fair to say? Okay, all right. What are some other vertical development experiences that we may have had? These are sort of the trial by fire kinds of experiences that we have in life. So what might some examples of that be? Yes?
Becoming a parent.
We actually say, complexity theory tells us that raising a child is more complex than putting a man on the moon. And the reason for that is that putting a man on the moon is essentially a really complicated math problem. But once it was solved forever. We can execute the same solution to put a man on the moon again. Has anyone tried to execute the same approach parenting different children and failed miserably? And so parenting is an awesome example. What are a couple other vertical development experiences that we come across in life? Yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. Identity changing in some ways, right? And getting divorced. Yes. Yeah, for sure. So good. I think you guys have a handle on this distinction between horizontal and vertical. And like I said, both of these are important, but what we have historically preferenced in our organizations and in our culture is horizontal development. And what I want to propose to you today is that, by the way, there's this whole other half of the equation that is super important. And the research actually indicates that it is a bigger leverage point than horizontal development in terms of building the leadership capacity that we need to be successful. Okay? For sure.
Is horizontal more about learning something new, and vertical is more about becoming someone new?
Here's the head. I love that. And here's another one I would offer you. Horizontal development is about what you know, and vertical development is about how you think. Horizontal development is about what you know, and vertical development is about how you think. Both are important, but boy, does thinking differently become more and more important the more senior we get in organizations. Cool. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about the model of vertical development that I'm going to introduce to you, I think, on the next slide. It is very similar to a tree with rings. So we grow through a linear set of stages of psychological development. We're essentially kind of in the psychology space today with this topic. We cannot skip stages of development. So when I show you the model in a minute, you're going to skim down these stages. You're going to pick the one that sounds the best to you, and you're going to be like, I need to go there. Or I want to be there. How do I do that? And I'm here to tell you it doesn't work like that. You cannot send you to a class to become more mature. It doesn't work that way, right? So we add rings to ourselves the same way that a tree adds rings. What is the beauty of that? We have all of the stuff that came before. We have access to the earlier stages of ourselves, and we can bring those earlier stages forward when it is appropriate, as well as the outer rings that sort of everyone sees, the more visible, more comfortable place where we might be at a particular point in time, okay? So it's a linear model. You cannot skip stages, and just like the tree, takes a while to grow. Does not happen overnight. All right, here is the model. This is a bit of an eye chart. I'm going to walk through these stages, so don't worry that you have to take all of this in. But I just want to give you a high-level overview of these 7 stages. There are a number of thinkers in this space. This is sort of a hybrid model. It's a bit of a mashup based on what labels and what terminology I really like to see. So we're going to walk through each of these relatively quickly and talk about their strengths and their opportunities and the story that they tell from one stage to the next. Sound good? So I want you to, just for yourself, where do you think, so we make meaning across multiple stages, right? I just said we can bring forward the stuff that came before, but we have what's called a center of gravity where we are most comfortable making meaning most of the time. So I would invite you to just, for yourself, note where do I think my center of gravity is at this point in my life? Okay? And we're going to talk through each one of these. So opportunists. This is actually a very uncommon center of gravity for most adults. This is kind of a stage that we are in very late childhood or very early adulthood. I think the numbers are like really less than 1% of adults have their center of gravity here. This is where I am identified with my needs and my wants. It's all about me. And I am going to do just about anything I need to do to get my needs and my wants met. So I view other people as means to an end. I am really good at sticking my elbows out and getting what I want. But this stage, do we think this stage is well correlated with leadership? No, it's not. It's inversely correlated with effective leadership, okay? But this is still an important stage. So an example of when my opportunist comes out, so even though I would guess that all of us in this room have grown past this stage, it is still inside of us. Mine comes out when I'm getting on an airplane and I need overhead space for my bag. I am getting on that plane the minute they call my group, and I am like making a beeline down the gangplank onto the plane, and as soon as I get my bag in an overhead space, preferably just in front of my seat so that I stand up, I get my bag, I walk off, then I return to normal Jessica, who is willing to help you with your bag and will say hello, smile. But most of us have instances where we're like, I'm going to get mine, get out of the way. Places where this is really good, when you're getting on an airplane. This is also really good in sales. So this is a very competitive stage. It can be very good in sales of like, I'm going to win, I'm going to close the deal. Also emergencies. When somebody just needs to take charge and make things happen or keep people safe, this stage is very good at keeping themselves safe and keeping other people safe if that's needed. One of the good examples of this is Rudy Giuliani after 9/11. when he was standing on the rubble at the World Trade Center, and he's like, we're going to be okay. We are the United States of America. We're going to find out who did this, and we're going to get them. Really provided a sense of reassurance and security and safety to people in New York and across the United States in what was a very scary time, right? Okay, that's opportunist. Not very common, but it is inside all of us. Conformer. So I grow from being identified with my needs and my wants to being identified with a group identity. A group identity. This could be a religion, a religious affiliation. This could be family affiliation. This could be, we see this a lot in high school kids and college kids, cliques, right? My friend group, I'm like really identified with my friend group. The mafia is another really good example of an adult organization that is oriented around conforming and belonging. And so what we really see at this stage is that I adopt the points of view, the opinions of the group, not mine, of the group. And so if you ask me, what do I think about something? I'm going to tell you what the group thinks. Or I'm going to tell you what the leader of the group thinks. And so when we're in this stage, we really prioritize loyalty. We do not like change because that might threaten my status or my position in the group. So that we have about 10% of the adult population has a center of gravity here. We often experience this in our families of origin, where we are sometimes strongly encouraged to ignore bad behavior in favor of keeping relationships smooth in the family, okay? The other big example I love about this is sports teams. I went to Michigan State. I'm a Big Ten Michigan State girl, right? Look, somebody's giving me eyes already. We're not on the... So, right, look, you just saw a great example. She's like, oh no, I don't identify with you, girlfriend. You're on the other team.
Party on now. You're better than the other one.
Okay, great. So we can both get on the same page that we hate the University of Michigan, right? So if you look at college and professional sports, like it really scratches this itch for us, right? If we think about the part of us that wants to belong, the parts of us that want to feel a part of something, sports affiliations like really do that for us. But it is not an effective form of leadership. Why? Why would this not be a great place to be if you are in a leadership role? Yeah, we could argue that leadership is change. And so this stage is also inversely correlated with effective leadership and business results, because I care more about keeping my status, my position in the group secure and keeping everything smooth than I am about actually getting anything done. Okay, makes sense? So once I've identified with the group and I'm kind of like feeling really a part of it, I start to feel constrained by that. So our development kind of swings back and forth. The next stage is expert, where I want to stand out now. I want to be recognized for what I know and the problems that I can solve. This is the most populous stage in our model. About 40% of us are here. So if we were to test all of us here in the room, about 40% of us would land here. Super, super common in organizations and highly valued in organizations. So this is, I'm identified with what I know and the problems notice the I can solve. I can solve. So why would this be a good fit in organizations? Do we need... Yeah. We absolutely need people who know stuff and can solve problems, don't we? 100%. Yeah, this is highly valued in organizations, but I'm going to put a little bit of a twist on that, largely at the individual contributor level. Because why? Someone put some words on why this might not be great in a leader role. If I'm the smartest person in the room and I know all this stuff, I don't need you. I don't need you, right? So not only do I don't really yet have the capacity to see the value that other people can bring, I'm not going to be able to harness that. I'm not going to be able to collaborate as well as if I were a little bit more mature, okay? Now, what I think is super interesting about this is that this is a highly populous stage. So when we start to think about that complexity crisis and the gap in leadership that we were talking about, that's part of the challenge here. This has a lot of value, but it also has some pretty serious limitations when we think about VUCA, right? And leading in increasingly complex environments, okay? The next stage, so what happens is The story of my development is I am so good at doing the thing, and I know so much, and I have really mastered my domain. And then I start to look at the results I'm getting. And what do you think I might find if I'm here and I'm beginning to look at the results I get? They may not be as good as they could be because I'm operating kind of in a silo by myself, right? And I start to realize that I'm not having as much of an impact as I could if I was actually able to cede some ground to other people, if I was able to work with and through other people, and maybe even lead a team. So the transition between this stage and the next stage, achiever, is I transition from I'm identified with what I know to I'm identified with what I can get done. See the distinction in that, right? Pretty big distinction. We often think that if you know a lot of stuff, that automatically means you can get a lot of stuff done. Not the same. Not the same. When I was when I had my center of gravity in expert 10, 12 years ago, and I was working at a major employer here in the Charlotte area, and I was the change management expert. This is when I was learning change management, and I knew all the stuff. I still know all the stuff, but now I realize it doesn't matter as much. But I was walking around this big organization wielding my knowledge kind of like Thor's hammer. And I got feedback from the chief strategy officer in the organization who said to me, "You are so smart. You know so much. And the trail of dead bodies behind you, you need to stop doing that." And it was really, really difficult, as you can imagine, really difficult feedback. But that was a pivotal moment in my own development to be like, oh, if you want to go far, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with others, right? Go together. And that was a big moment for me, and okay, I really got to figure that out, okay? So what happens is we go from expert to achiever, where I shift my orientation towards outcomes. Less about knowledge, more about outcomes, okay? This is the second most populous stage in our model. 35% of the adult population has a center of gravity here. This is the stage that is most preferred by organizations. This is the stage that most looks like success in Western business culture, right? Melissa talked about what does society define as success? They define this as success. So this is, I work really hard, I'm really good at solving problems, I believe there is an answer to every problem, and if we just work hard enough, we will find it. I take a lot of responsibility for outcomes here. Sometimes too much responsibility for outcomes here, okay? What do you think the major limitation is of this stage? I'm working really hard, I'm running really hard. Burnout. Yes, awesome. My to-do list is never done. There is a belief that I'm going to get it done and I'm going to be able to take a break at some point, but that's not really true, right? We can always find more things to do if that's how we're wired, okay? So again, highly valued in organizations. Teamwork comes online here. Entry-level managerial capability comes online here. Tons and tons of value in this stage, and it is also not the stage that is most highly correlated with leadership effectiveness and business results. Are you surprised? So why might it not be? So we talked about burnout as a limitation here. What other limitations do you imagine there might be with this picture of success in Western business culture? Lack of planning. So foresight, yes, that's a good one. So timelines get longer the more mature we get. We are able to think and work in longer time frames. What was yours? Micromanager. Yes, a little bit more of an issue at expert because I think I have the answers, and so I'm going to be a little bit more up in other people's stuff at that stage. But I'm going to get up in your stuff if I want to get the thing done. Yeah, because I'm just on to the next thing. I'm on to the next thing, yeah. So we could argue that if there's a distinction in leadership around being and doing, we are all about doing here. Being, I don't even really know what that is yet. I don't even know what that is yet. So what happens is we begin to experience the limitations of this stage. Burnout is probably the biggest thing. There is this desire, the being starts to go, hello, would you like to take a nap? Would you like? And people will say, man, if I could just take a 3-month sabbatical, I'll never be able to do that, but if I could, I would. You'll hear that from people who are here and are running up against the edges of what this stage has to offer. Okay? Next stage is called redefining. And so what happens here, I like to say this is the stage where some people decide to burn it all down. This is what popular culture refers to as the midlife crisis. Okay? So that's how we refer to it. What it really means developmentally is that my thinking goes from outside in to inside out, which means that at achiever and expert and conformer, I am really taking the signals from outside. I'm taking signals from my family, the culture, media, my bosses, my friends, everybody on the outside about what I should be doing, what success looks like, and how I should be behaving. And what happens at achiever towards the end of it, when we're getting frustrated and burned out, is we start to look at all of those assumptions that have been programmed into us our whole lives, and we start to go, some of this stuff doesn't really feel good. Some of this stuff doesn't actually work for me. And so the transition is from outside in thinking, I take it from the outside, I don't question it too much, I just do the thing, to inside out thinking here at Redefining, which means that I am more able to identify and self-generate my values, the things that are important to me, and I begin to do the work of aligning my life and my work with my values. And so people will sometimes make pretty significant changes to what they are doing and how they are living as they make this transition. So some people will leave corporate America, some people will stop working, some people will start businesses, right? You'll see some pretty significant shifts in people's lives as they wrestle with this transition. And I say the word wrestle because this is not, developmental work is not always a panacea. It's not always happy because we get overwhelmed and we feel frustrated and we can't make sense of things from the place where we are at. So we are invited to unmake and remake our way of looking at the world to make better sense of it in a more mature, more sophisticated, bigger way. And that is very true, especially true, most true at this transition. Only 20% of the adult population makes the journey from achiever to redefining. So we see a pretty significant drop off. Why is that? Because our culture rewards achiever and expert. Our culture reinforces achiever and expert. And there's a ton of value there. It can be very comfortable and very effective and very successful for us to be at expert and achiever. Okay? I think that's all I want to say about redefining. This is a big deal, though. This is a big one. This is a big one. Yeah?
Is it connected to that stage community stage?
Sometimes it can be. We just think of it as like you're living, you're experiencing life. And the things that promote vertical development are a leaning into your own development. If you have always kind of viewed yourself as being on a journey, you will probably be pursuing this in some way. Or finding yourself in over your head. Living in Egypt. Oh boy, I am in over my head. I got to figure out how to cross the street. So age certainly brings more life experience, but there's not necessarily a correlation with age. Yeah. Strategist. This is the stage that is most highly correlated with leadership effectiveness and achieving and sustaining transformational change. So this is a pretty high bar for leadership, right? But this is the stage that the research is telling us we really need more people at to meet that complexity. Only 5% of the adult population has a center of gravity at this stage. So you begin to see we're just missing numbers, right? We're just missing quantity of people who have achieved these later stages of development that can help us get where we need to go to deal with all the heavy stuff we have going on, okay? At strategist, this visual is kind of a good representation of sort of what it looks like. There's an ability to really see a lot, to see the complexity and to be able to navigate it elegantly, to find your way and to lead people through really difficult, complex issues and challenges. We also get a pretty high orientation again towards outcomes here and activities, so the doing kind of comes back up here a little bit. This can be a really nice place to be. Like there's a lot of capacity. There's a lot of capacity at this stage to make things happen. And then the last stage in our model here is alchemist. And this one is a little bit difficult to talk about because less than 1% of the adult population is here. So we just don't have a lot of things that we can say about less than 1% of people that is common across all of them. What we do know is that time frames get really long here. Generational, I can think in beyond my own lifetime into future generations. Time sort of becomes nebulous. I can think really far back historically. I can think really far in the future. Time gets long. Highly spiritual. People don't usually get to this late stage of development without having a fairly robust spiritual practice of some sort. And this is, so people who we believe may have been at this stage, Nelson Mandela, Mother Teresa, Martin Luther King, are some of the people that we may be familiar with who represented like this very late stage of development. So, all right. So let me, before I move on, and I'm watching time here, any questions about the stages? Let me flip back here for just a second to the whole model. Have you changed your mind about where you think you may be? The other thing I would offer you is this idea of range, right? So we actually make meaning across multiple stages, kind of like the tree rings. So you have your center of gravity, but then you also have a foot in other stages. Do you have a sense of what your range may be? Okay.
I think it's interesting too to think about even yourself when you think about somebody else that you think of as being your child.
Yeah. So we don't. Yeah, we don't have a lot of time today to get into it, but it's very interesting to talk about how people at different stages interact with each other and what that means for what that means. You know, you can imagine somebody who is at Alchemist, super woo-woo, let's just call it that, who's interacting with somebody who's really grounded and expert and is standing on this body of concrete knowledge that they're, you know, that they use every day. Like, they might be like ships passing in the night, right? So it gets super interesting when you start to talk about leadership implications and different people at different stages of development working with each other. And I think a lot of the interpersonal challenges that we find in the work setting have this is a really nice lens to look at those through. Yeah. All right, so in our last few minutes, well, it's like 7 minutes left-ish? 8 minutes left. Okay. What I want to do in these last 8 minutes is offer you 4 strategies that promote vertical development, right? So I've offered you this model, invited you to think about where you are, talked a little bit about why this is important, and you're probably like, okay, what do I do? How do I help my organization grow vertically if that's what, you know? So the question I would ask you before we dive into these strategies is, what is the fit between where you think you are and what's being asked of you in your work context or in your life context? So I don't want you to look at this and go, I just need to get to strategist, or I just need to get to alchemist. What I want you to do is say, well, what is the fit? What is being asked of me at work or in my life? Where am I? Where do I think I am right now? And how do those two things fit together? Okay, that's really the most important question. Okay, instead of just like slaying the vertical development model and, you know, getting to the pot of gold in Candyland, right? All right, so with that question, 4 strategies to promote vertical development. The first one here is make sense of complexity. So we human beings really like to ignore the complexity and simplify it and bring it down to a place where we can actually deal with it. That is, in general, a big mistake. Ignoring the complexity, simplifying is, you know, it's just not as effective as actually seeing the complexity and figuring out a way to navigate through it. So ways to do this are, if I'm about to make a decision around something, let me just play with this idea for a minute. What are some of the downstream consequences that are going to happen after I make this decision? Can I allow myself to imagine or predict what I think some of those things might be? Who else is going to be impacted? What are they going to think? What might they do in response to this? And to begin to play situations out 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 steps down the road, right? So give yourself some time and space to see the complexity of a situation, to imagine how all of these interdependent people and systems are going to react to anything that happens in the system, okay? Next one, perspective shifting. Another way to say this is to be able to take multiple perspectives. So can you really climb into somebody else's shoes and appreciate how they're going to look at something? Okay? Again, none of this is rocket science, but to actually do it is really challenging. So I often will advise clients who are struggling and they're sitting, I say, okay, if you're sitting in a meeting that you're just attending and there's a bunch of people there, I want you to write all their names down on a piece of paper. And then given whatever's being discussed in the meeting, I want you to imagine what they most need to get out of the meeting. Why are they there? What is their agenda? What are their motives? What are they worried about? What are they angry about? Whatever, I see it, thank you. And write that down. Try to find out what their perspective is or imagine what it is. And then once you've kind of like, oh boy, there's really a lot of perspectives here. What would it look like to integrate those? Are there any solutions or approaches that build on like a 2 + 2 is greater than 4 kind of a deal, or 1 + 1 is greater than 2 way of thinking about potential solutions that meet more of the stakeholders' needs or wants, okay? Self-reflect and adjust. So this is like being a fly on the wall of your own brain and observing yourself. Can I think about my own thinking and think about my own behavior? Can I separate myself from myself for even just a minute to consider what's driving my behavior and what's driving my thinking? And as a result of that, would I make any changes? Would I make any adjustments, right? And so that is what self-reflecting and adjusting is. What we want people to do is to begin to notice their own thinking and behavior and then be able to make adjustments increasingly in real time. Increasingly in real time. You guys have been a very engaged, super awesome audience, but let's imagine you had come in here and you were like, you know, not off to a good start today. I probably would have amped my energy up even more to try to bring you back up to a more energetic place, right? I would have paid attention to your perspective, then paid attention to my own energy and made some adjustments. I don't have to do a whole lot of that today. I'm kind of matching you, right? I'm kind of matching your energy. You came in with great energy, okay? And the last one here is opposable thinking. Can I hold two contradictory ideas in my head at the same time? So a great example of this in organizations is centralizing and decentralizing. Most organizations that are large enough flip back and forth between these two ideas, right? We go, we're going to centralize, and then we do that for a few years, and we run into the limitations of it, and then we swing wildly back to decentralized. Well, what would it look like to say, hey, there's benefits of centralizing and decentralizing, and we want to try and capture as much of that upside as possible and minimize as much of the downside as possible. I'm going to take two opposing ideas and try to integrate them and balance them. Make sense? So these four capacities, see the complexity, make sense of it, take other people's perspectives, reflect on your own thinking and behavior, and hold opposing ideas simultaneously. These are the four major ways on how to think that are most going to promote vertical development. It's been a delight to be with you today. I do really love your energy. This is a white paper here that I invite you to download with a QR code, and there is a special offer in the back of the white paper to take a vertical development assessment and actually find out what your stage is or what your stages are. So if this is interesting to you and you think you might want to actually learn a little bit more about yourself through the eyes of this framework, I invite you to download the white paper, and there will be instructions in the back for the special offer. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Love that. And thanks so much for being here. Really appreciate it.